Well, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. It's good to have you here tonight. We are taking back off again to the Harmony of the Gospels, lesson 112. And so we are just looking at one particular portion that's only in one of the Gospels. And so we begin to look at this. So it says, "And he was teaching in the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bowed together, and could no wise lift up herself. And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him, and said unto her, Woman, thou art loosened from thy infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, glorified God. The ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath day, and said to the people, There are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them therefore come, and he be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. The Lord then answered him and said, Thou hypocrite, doth not each of you on the Sabbath lose his ox or his ass from the stall, and lead him away to watering? And ought not this woman be a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan hath bound, lo, these 18 years, be loosened from this bond on the Sabbath day? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were ashamed, and all the people rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him." If you remember, as it's been off and on, it seems like the last several months, but we've been moving from a particular area where there's a crowd of religious men and the general population that have crowded around Jesus along with the disciples. And he's been teaching them about the kingdom of God and what it takes to enter it in, and how riches can hurt someone's perspective of what is important in life, and how repentance plays a huge role in turning a life around. Now, those are just 3 areas, but he went into really big depth on some of these to talk about these different things. And so tonight, as we find ourselves in a little bit different location now, because Jesus is beginning to move from this, and he begins to find himself in a new location. But it's the same Jesus. It's the same religious men and their attitudes. It's kind of like the same attitude of the people. Some are happy with what he does, and some are not so happy. And so we have this split of who Jesus is and so forth. So what we want to do tonight is we want to look at this. And so we're going to start with Jesus sees. And so when we talk about what Jesus sees, we pick up the life of Christ in a synagogue, teaching the people from the local area. So this is not unusual. We've seen Jesus do this a couple of times, right? But this time I want you to notice that it's important that we see that as we draw closer to Jesus entering Jerusalem, this is one of the last times Scriptures show us Jesus in the synagogue. Because I know I keep saying this, but we're getting closer. We're not too far away. We're just maybe several months down the road. And I mean several, depending on how everything happens. It could be 6 months, but we're several months away, where we actually have Jesus coming in to the triumphal entry, all right? So we're getting there. And so this is his push to get to Jerusalem, because he has to get there, because he knows that he's going to be crucified. So we have this happening for him. Number 2, we're not given a time or a place, but we're given details that help to identify the mission of the Lord on this Sabbath day. Now, isn't it strange that every time Jesus does something, he always does it on the Sabbath day, and somebody always gets mad? And so, again, this is the whole emphasis, is that this story takes place on the Sabbath day. Number 3, we find Jesus in the synagogue on the Sabbath, which indicates Jesus was worshiping his Father in the same way as those who came to worship as well. And so when Jesus came to the synagogue, he was going to be there to worship God, which is his Father, just as they were, right? He came to worship just like them. Number 4, in the same room, there's a woman who is physically tied up by her bones in her back for 18 years. It's what's called tied up, is what we might say, to the point that she could not raise herself straight. And so we might say a curvature of the spine. We might say that she has more technical names for it today. But she was bent over to the point that she couldn't straighten herself out. And she had been this way. Now, some commentators, when you read about this story, they're going to say that it's a type of arthritis. And Rendell Short said it was a, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but he said it was spondylitis deformans. In other words, the bones of her spine were fused into a rigid mass. So we kind of know that today, right? We hear people talking about arthritis. We talk about people having bones that need to be unfused or fused together in order to work. And so we kind of get an idea of what shape this woman was in. Number 6, although we do not have her name, what we know is that she is a worshiper of God. She is in a place where she found it important to seek God in her life. So I think that is a great mental picture. I wish this could be a mental picture for every believer. That this woman who could not straighten up her back was in a place to worship God. And she'd been in that condition for 18 years. Number 7, it was the synagogue that Jesus saw her and called her to come. So this is where he finds her. He calls her to come, and the healing took place. Now, there are some things that we kind of want to note about this that I think it's interesting. And I like what John Corson wrote about the story as he states, upon entering a situation, some have eye to see what's wrong. Others have an eye to see what's right. Jesus has an eye to see who's in a need. And I think that if you look across through the scriptures, you would see that. There's always somebody who says this is what's wrong. Somebody who always looks and says, well, I see this being right. But Jesus sees somebody in what they need. And so we can see that throughout scriptures. Number 9, we see that Jesus spoke first for her to be loosened from her condition. And then he reached out and touched her. It's one of several ways in which Jesus heals. Sometimes it's a touch first and then words. And so we have the laying of hands on her at this time. Number 10, what is strange about this encounter is the unknowns. Okay, so there's a lot of details that we don't know, some that we'd probably like to know. And so did the woman actually know who Jesus was? Did she know? Had she heard about him? Has she heard of other stories of his healing? She a woman who, because of her condition, was not up to current events? Maybe she didn't know what was going on around in her community. I mean, we really have no idea. There's nothing here that can point us to what the woman thought about Jesus, how she may have encountered him before or even heard of him. We don't have any of those details. We don't know if anybody even came to Jesus and said, did you see that woman over there? I don't think that happened because the disciples didn't write that into the story. So there's a lot of unknowns that we don't know about this. But there are some things that we do know. Number 11, what we know is that Jesus saw her in a need, and at that very moment in the synagogue on a Sabbath, Jesus healed this woman. So he didn't wait until Monday or Sunday or what we'd call Saturday 6. So he didn't wait till 6 p.m. or 6:01 to heal her. He comes and he heals her before then. Number 12, Jesus spoke to her about her condition, touched her, and immediately she was loosened from her from her condition, and she began to praise God. So we find that he speaks to her, he touches her, and immediately she's loosened from her back and she can go straight up. Number 13, how could this woman not worship what God has done? She doesn't recognize Jesus in any form, but she was conscious that it was an act of God on her behalf. And so she begins to worship God. Number 14, what if this woman in her condition decided that it wasn't worth going to the synagogue that day? Now, I know it didn't happen in this story. But what if? What if you could look back and see that you didn't go to a church service and you missed out on a blessing that could have been a part of your life? What if that very service could have been the very service that could help you in your spirit or your walk with the Lord? Right? So a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, you know, I really didn't feel like going to church. I didn't want to go to church, but I went anyway. And I'm glad that I did, because I felt better after leaving church than I did before going to church. And so there's this attitude that coming to church, coming to worship God, is important enough that we see that we're able to come and to participate. Now, I think I've told you that in my first church, we had an elderly lady that lived right next door. And at one point in time, it was grass area, and then we bought that little piece and made it a parking lot. And she could barely walk. And there was times that I would be looking out the window of the church and watch her come out of her house and walk across that and fall down. And literally pick herself back up and come into church. She didn't let that stop her. I think if you listen to Southern gospel music from years ago, there's a song called Excuses. And it sings about all the excuses why people don't come to church. And it talks about the family that all has to stay home because the baby has to sneeze. You know, so it's the idea that a lot of times we don't come to church. And that's why I said at the beginning, I wish everybody could see this physical picture of this woman who cannot sit up straight, come into the house of God. For 18 years she was in pain, but it never stopped her to go to the house of God. Because of this, what happens? We see the religious indignation. Number B, an occurring circumstance is that Jesus does something on behalf of God and the religious men get mad. It's something that we've said over and over and over. They're just not happy with Jesus. It doesn't matter what he does, no matter how wonderful it is, no matter who is cured, no matter who is demon-possessed, who is no longer demon-possessed, somebody who's now in their wrong mind, put in their right mind, it doesn't matter. It's because Jesus did it, and they don't like Jesus. Number one, this is not the first time that Jesus has pointed out as he worked on the Sabbath day. I put the word in quotation marks because Jewish law considered many things to be work, and this is one of them. So what we're talking about is the set of laws that Jesus gave, Jesus gave more in detail, and over a period of time, these religious men had added more to, I think, what was it? There are 613 or somehow laws that you would have to know in order to be a Jew. Number two, law after law was written to govern all activity on the Sabbath. So it's just not the Sabbath, but all days, certain things, but on the Sabbath especially. A person could not travel, fast, cook, buy, sell, draw water, walk beyond a certain distance, lift anything, fight in a war, or heal on the Sabbath unless a life was at stake. A person who was unable even to contemplate any work or activity. So, if you think about this, we see this thought of the law in a very unique way from what we call Mark chapter 16, verse 1. It said, and when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and Salome had brought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. Think about this. They did not do this beforehand because it was the Sabbath. They couldn't work. They briefly wrapped Jesus' body to put him in the tomb so that they could go back after the Sabbath to actually do the work of preparing Jesus' body. So when we talk about governing the activity on Sabbath, this is what happened. I don't remember all of this, and maybe some of you can remember this, that when you grew up, there was not much open on Sundays. You know, there was not a whole lot going on Sundays. Things were closed because it was the Lord's Day. I do know that in our town, when we grew up, that they had, I think it was Wednesday afternoons, they all closed at noon. You know, they closed at noon on Wednesday afternoons. And so you had all these different things. And you remember on Sunday you couldn't buy alcohol, or, you know, you just couldn't do a lot of things. I think you could say that we've come way past that now, right? I don't think there's anything you can't do on Sunday that you couldn't do Monday through Friday. It's all open game anymore, right? The whole day is open to do whatever you want to do. So the laws begin to change a little bit, right? The laws have changed, culture has changed, and so there's not much of observance, as we might say, on the Sabbath, because everything seems to be what we'd like to do. So in this case, though, in the culture of that day, that would have been a no-no. So, you know, you couldn't walk but a certain distance, and, you know, there was consequences if things happened if you violated this. So it's a law, you know, and people would tell on you. So this is what we see. Number 3, I want to draw your attention to the word indignation, okay? It refers to anger or scorn aroused by something perceived as unfair, unworthy, or wrong. It encompasses anger or extreme anger mingled with contempt, disgust, or abhorrence. Now, when we look at this and what has taken place, I'm pretty sure, unless we are sitting there with a physical illness and not healed, I think, I don't know about you, but I think that if I was in that place and I knew that lady had a physical ailment that she could not even stand up, right? That when she could stand up, I think I would be elated. I think I would be happy for that lady who received such a miracle. But not this guy. Number 5, not this guy. He takes what he perceives as unjust to take it loudly so that everyone in the synagogue could hear and feel his emotional anger. Now, his argument, number 6, his argument is there are 6 days when people can work. The Sabbath was to keep in reverence for God. Okay? So I'm pretty sure this religious man is not like this. I don't think his attitude would have been, now Jesus, you know that there are 6 days that you could have healed this woman, but not this day. I don't think he was like that. I think he was loud. I think he was boisterous. He wanted the people to hear how bad Jesus was. And do you know that when you go try to defame people or you want to say something about, you do it loudly, right? You do it to where you want other people to hear about it so that you can give them the same perception that you have against that person. And I think that's what that guy wanted. He wanted the people in the synagogue to be on his side, so he wanted to point this out. There are 2 noteworthy thoughts here. Number 1, first, the interpretation of God's law has been taken way out of context. Remember, Jesus already spoke about this as we label the Beatitudes. He's already said, hey, this is what you say, but this is what God says. And so we could say that the religious people have really taken a lot of these laws out of context, built upon them to build a false life. Second, the religious man and his religious brothers would not admit that Jesus is God's son. Very few of them will ever notice that Jesus is the Son of God. He is not going to do that, all right? So most of our Muslim people that are here, they're going to make the same argument. The same argument is that nowhere it says that Jesus is God and that he is God's son, but he is also God himself. So, but Jesus is the Son of God, and he is God incarnated. So, imagine you're just healed. You're the one who just got healed. You hadn't been able to stand up for 18 years because your back has been crooked. You get to stand up for the very first time. And you hear that there are people who are upset that you were healed on the Sabbath. How would you respond to this man without using your fist? How would you respond? Well, here's how Jesus responds. Exposed hypocrisy. Number C, Jesus is going to respond to the hypocrisy of the blindness of a heart and values, of that values rules over people. Rules over people. Because that's what it is. It's law over the people. And it always has been for them. Number one, the Lord answered the religious man who took his anger out on Jesus and the people by first calling him a hypocrite. Okay? He called him a hypocrite. We get the word hypocrite because it means that someone is behind a mask. Sometimes you'll see a movie, you'll have that mask, as it's called by a hypocrite, someone who's behind that. Number two, so Jesus brings in the law. Okay, if you want to argue law, let's bring in the law. But not on behalf of humans, but on the law that concerns animals. So he's going to bring a part of the law in, and he's going to ask them about this particular law and what it means. And the rabbis were rabbis in that culture valued animals. They were animal lovers. And there's nothing wrong with that. They wanted them to be treated well. Nothing wrong with that. On the Sabbath, animals could be let out by the chain or as long as nothing was carried. You can find that in the Shabbat 5:1. In other words, as long as they're not carrying anything, they can allow these animals to come out because it's not work, right? Water could be drawn for them and poured into a trough, though a man must not hold a bucket for the animal. So, this is not work, but this is work. All right? Trough, bucket. Trough, bucket. Again, it's rules over people. Now, am I glad that the animal's getting water? Absolutely. But this is the hypocritical stance that they have. Number three, their hypocritical stance is that the religious man seeks the welfare of an animal more than the case, or in this case, a woman. In other words, this man would have no problem for an animal to be taken care of, but no way does he want to see this woman healed on the Sabbath day. At least that's his claim. Number four, notice that Jesus said that they loosed their animal to get water. Okay? They loose it to get water because they have to allow it to come out, but objected to a woman being loosened by the hand of a physical ailment. Yeah, we can let the animal loose, but we don't want her to be loose from her ailment. Okay? Number five, Jesus did go a step further to identify this woman, number five, as a daughter of Abraham. Okay? So he's going to identify her as a Jewish woman after the family of Abraham, or the ancestry of Abraham. Number A, when Jesus calls the woman's daughter Abraham, he's making a profound statement about her identity and her rights within God's covenant community. This woman had the right not only to be in the synagogue, but the right to be healed because of who she was. B, there was an element of social radicalism where here the daughter of Abraham is treated as having equal rights with the son of Abraham. So again, we're talking about a woman, we're talking about a lady who has the right to be healed just as it would be for the son of Abraham. Number 6, In her condition, culture may say she has very little worth because of her condition. This is not true. She is the daughter of Abraham, and by faith, she represents her true identity of being that daughter. She was in the synagogue worshiping God. Abraham's God, Isaac's God, Jacob's God. Number 7, Jesus not only straightens out her physical condition, but he also restores her identity, which is tied to her faith. As she keeps coming to the synagogue, a place she found every Sabbath. So that's her identity. She's a woman of faith. She's been coming to worship God, even though her condition was not the best. Number 8, Jesus says, ought not this woman, indicates that the word ought means in comparison. So ought not this woman should, in comparison to the animals. Does human life value more than animal life? And before you answer that, not everyone will agree with your answer. Because we as people, those who are in charge, can put animals on an endangered list that they should not be killed or touched. But babies in the womb are fair game. So to me, we're placing more value on an endangered animal than we are a child or a human being, right? So we would say, yes, we believe that a human life is valuable, right? And it should be more valuable than an animal, even though we love our animals, right? We even have a dog in our attention. So please, doggy, we're not talking about you, all right? So, but that's what he wanted to say. He said, you all really take care good of your animals. Isn't she more valuable than that? Notice number 9. Notice that the adversaries became ashamed because they found themselves publicly exposed and humiliated by their own faulty reason. Now think about this. Who do you think the crowd's going to side with at this particular time? I think they would, after seeing this woman being healed, I think they would side with Jesus that yes, it is the Sabbath, and yes, she is healed, and yes, we do take care of our animals, but she is a value, and so we want to side with Jesus on this because this is a miracle. This is something great. And so this religious man and his friends are all going to be ashamed to even bring up this argument. But again, this is the same thing that happens. Over and over and over, religious people try to make an argument with Jesus. Jesus turns it on them, and they either walk away. Some of them are mad. Some of them say, yeah, I get it now. I understand. But he makes them think about what they've said, right? So, number 10, the ruler of the synagogue is ashamed because his concern for spiritual matters cannot survive the sight of God's compassion. So, his compassion, God's compassion, outweighs the law and the worthiness of the rules. Number 11, the issue is not really the Sabbath itself. It is a religious man thinking he was defending holiness. But in reality, he was resisting mercy. So, it's always this question, I guess, and I don't know the answer to this, but if this religious man had been in that synagogue and this woman that could not sit up straight for 18 years, could not raise her back for 18 years, if that was his mother, do you think he would have been excited for her? Or do you think he would still defended the law because that was the right thing to do? I think it's a good question, and we don't know that answer, but I think sometimes he was defending holiness. He thinks that by these rules, by these laws, that this is the holiest way to worship God and to live for God, that we must obey these things. But what he was forgetting was that the mercy that God gives out of compassion, he was missing that. And I really think that sometimes, even as church people, we gloss over God's mercy because we see how church ought to be, and we're not willing to hand out such mercy as God would, or compassion. So we have to be careful. Number 12, let's not forget that Jesus also recognizes and calls out Satan. The bent-over woman had been bound by Satan, illustrating Luke's understanding of Satan as holding humanity in his grasp. And we're not going to go all into whether she was possessed by Satan and all that kind of stuff, but Jesus has alluded to that this messed up back was somehow connected to Satan. 13, Jesus healed on the Sabbath despite opposition. What it shows us is the battle between Satan and the Lord, and in each case we see scriptures that Jesus wins the battle. And we know that in the book of Revelation, Jesus wins the war. So, we always see the opposition that comes. Number 14, in the end, we also see how the crowd reacts as they rejoiced at what had taken place, showing both Satan and the religious crowd were ashamed. So, Satan didn't get the victory. The religious crowd didn't get the victory that day. The Lord did. The woman did. The crowd did. Number 15. It is said that Jesus frees the afflicted, humbles the proud, and calls the whole assembly to choose what kind of people they will be. So what kind of people they will be? Are you going to be on Jesus' side? Or are you going to be on the religious side? What are you going to do? Right? And I think we still have those lines today. Are you going to be one of those who are saved, who has a relationship with Christ, or are you going to be one of those who are lost, who doesn't know Jesus? So it's very important for us to see that even this woman who was healed this day had felt the concern of a religious man who didn't think she was worthy to be healed because the law was more important than her own life. For those who are watching online, thank you so much, and we hope to see you on Sunday.